Okay, so today we're going to look at the sensory profile, and this is for the age range of 3 to 10 years old. There are also infant and toddler and adolescent and adult versions, as well as the school companion version, which examines school-based functional limitations. So the sensory profile assesses a child's response to sensory events in their daily life. There are 8 areas of sensory input that are examined. So there's auditory, visual, activity level, taste and smell, body position, movement, touch, and emotional and social preferences. Overall, it assesses sensory preferences and behavioral patterns.
So the score of the sensory profile determines if the child is either a sensory seeker, avoider, has sensitivity, or is a bystander. Those are the 4 quadrants used in this assessment.
The primary goal of the sensory profile is to determine strengths and challenges associated with sensory processing in the context of everyday life. So the results give us an idea of how the child compares to a typically developing child in each of these 4 quadrants. The scores are presented as a range of scores in relation to the normal curve, which uses standard deviations. Percentile ranges are provided as an additional score for when standardized scores are required, so they can be optional depending on the practice setting. So the raw scores are compared with the normal curve scores for each of the 4 quadrants. And if a child scores 1 standard deviation from the mean, they are considered more than others or less than others in that quadrant, depending on which direction their standard deviation was from the mean. So if a child scores 2 standard deviations or more from the mean, they are then considered much more than others or much less than others. So for example, if a child scored 2 standard deviations above the mean for the sensitivity quadrant, that child would be considered to notice sensory input much more than others.
So the sensory profile, too, this many, that you see on your very own computer screen, is pretty unique. How is it unique, you frantically ask? Well, relax, because I'm here to tell you. It's unique because it provides a standard method for professionals to document a child's sensory processing patterns. So it can help identify the effect of sensory processing on functional participation in the context of the child's home, school, and/or community, okay? As we've begun to appreciate in class, sensory processing is very complicated. This assessment is very helpful because it isolates and analyzes the different areas of sensory processing, which gives the tester insight into the child's individual sensory strengths and challenges. So for example, a child could be sensory seeking for auditory input, but avoidant for visual input. This kind of information would provide a lot of guidance when planning interventions.
All right, so we're going to give a couple examples of what the questions in the sensory profile would look like. And in this scenario, I'm the occupational therapist and Dan is a child's father. So usually when you ask the questions for the sensory profile, it's either with the student's teacher or the child's teacher or one of their parents or guardians. So for the first question, this is under the auditory processing quadrant. So how would you respond to this? So my child reacts strongly to unexpected or loud noises. So for example, dogs barking, sirens, a hairdryer. So 5 is almost always, 4 is frequently, 3 is half the time, 2 is occasionally, and 1 is almost never.
Well, little Jeremiah Sanders very frequently reacts to loud noises, especially our dog barking. So
Okay.
I would definitely say frequently.
Frequently, okay, so that's a 4. And then for the second question, this is more about visual processing, so sensitivities with vision. So my child prefers to play or work in low lighting. Would you say 5 almost always, 4 frequently, 3 half the time, 2 occasionally, or 1 almost never?
Almost always, for sure.
Almost always, so they mostly prefer dim or low lighting.
We've actually had to put in faders for lights because he was very sensitive to the bright harsh lights in the house. So
Okay, gotcha.
definitely always for that one. Almost always.
Well, thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for wondering about Jeremiah Sanders. He's a cutie, isn't he?
Yeah.
I don't really think he's that cute.
Here's a closer look at the scoring booklet. So for the auditory processing section, which is one of those 8 areas we mentioned that is assessed, we can see that there's 8 questions, and here's the scores. So if the teacher or parent were to tell us almost always as a response to every question, the raw score would be 40 because there's 8 questions, and we would just add those all up. So 40
would be the max score. We can see here auditory. Yeah, there's 40. So the raw score would be 40, which would place them over here in the much more than others. So additionally then, for each of the areas assessed, you can see that there's a little cheat sheet given for which quadrant of those 4 quadrants is being assessed with each question. So for SK, that would be seeking, AV would be avoiding, SN would be sensitivity, RG would be regulation, and they give you a place on the booklet to tally up all of those separate quadrant scores. So each of these would give you another raw score, which you could then refer to on the back here to again see where they lie in that normal curve.